Yes, thank you, Councillor. The references to the Crown are just because there have been a number of different processes, some of which well predate us, of discussions with the Crown about the opportunity that there is in Monaco. You know, as Councillor Quack's very eloquently articulated before, there's a lot of good infrastructure and assets there, but it's kind of punching under its weight, and it's in a part of the region that will keep growing rapidly. So the Crown has a strong interest in it as well. There are some significant blocks of Housing New Zealand land in it. There's the DHB land that the Mayor referred to. So the Crown has an interest, but has not yet really, if you like, firmed up what it might like to do or ultimately not do. So that's just part of the process going forward over the next period of time, and you know, depending what flows out of that and what the Crown might wish to achieve, could involve some commitments by them to projects. So it's just meant to float that as a possibility rather than hint that something in particular agreed or understood. It's very, very early stages. Your broader comment, I think it's probably fair to say there's no significant major learning from the Monaco process, but obviously as we've gone along, each one of these we're learning ways to streamline it a bit more and how to identify issues and articulate them. So I would describe it probably as lots of smaller learnings rather than any big major thing we realised we didn't do.
I'll just echo the provision for car parks in the business centre comment that came up earlier. Also something to watch out for in terms of Onehunga. I know
and you have a very similar dynamic there where, you know, if you think about Onehunga working as a connected centre with a lot of people activity, it is very dominated as well by lots of sites taken up by at-grade car parking. So that's two sides of a coin when we need parking, but it also acts as a bit of a deterrent to the build-up of a feeling of density and activity in a town centre if it's not properly planned for and provided.
And provided for in the future too. Thank you. All the best.
Thank you, Councillor Crum. Huge apologies, Councillor Penrose.
Oh,
I
no
skipped
problem,
over you.
Chair.
Councillor Penrose.
No, I wasn't actually going to speak until you'd moved that slide there and you showed the recommendations, because I was a bit concerned. Councillor Philippina was talking about, and I won't speak as long as him. But I just want to say to David and John, to Richard, awesome work. It'll be interesting to watch it unfold in the coming years ahead. And a lot's been said around this table as to what it will create, and in particular Rainbow's End. That's what I'm concerned about. So the recommendation that you work closely with those guys, because it's absolutely fundamental, especially as the population in Auckland increases and the young ones increase in Auckland. The theme park is absolutely critical. You know, people drive over the Tasman to see the Gold Coast for the theme parks, and it really gels that place. So it's critical that Rainbow's End, as it develops in the years ahead and continues to develop, that they play an integral part, and that car park is an integral part of that development. As we look, as has been mentioned in regards to Wirral, and the opening of that on the 26th, that'll be significant for the south as well, bringing all that area in together. Sadly, some of us won't be able to make it to the opening because we've got the Parks Committee, but I'm sure there'll be a number there to see that come to fruition. So again, good work.
Thank you, Councillor Penrose. Councillor Casey.
Oh, hi David. One of the things we're doing today under G is signing off your operational budget. I just have a couple of questions on page 10, which is the cost of the various consultants for the different parts of it. My first question is why you've used the figure $220 per hour for each of the consultants. That's for the framework planning, communications, implementation and development.
Of necessity, Councillor, these are estimations. So there's just a number that reflects our experience of the sort of skill sets that need to be brought in. Obviously, if we can do better than that, we will do better than that. But it tends to be skill sets we're trying to get in are, quite. They are considerably skilled people that we're trying to use for this type of work. They're in short supply, particularly at the moment with the construction sector as it is. So this is just meant to be a realistic representation of costs.
Do they get brought in for is it a contract or is it per hourly rate? So
Well, it will differ. I mean, as much as possible, we're trying to use staff, but of course the workload with this and everything else is considerable. So with different jobs, different functions, we've got to leverage off that combination and try and find the right balance between staff and contractors.
Why do you need extra comms help?
Extra which?
Communications. You've got communications staff.
Well, there's a significant amount of community engagement and stakeholder engagement in a regeneration of an area this size, and what is known from the waterfront experience and probably any other regeneration project you can think of around the world is a high level of community engagement and buy-in with stakeholders. I mean, Councillor Crumb's next to you, she'll know already before we've even got the plan ready how much engagement is having to go on in Onehunga. All of that requires skilled people, and it requires lots of hours.
So it's really for the public consultation that you're hiring consultants, not communications per se. Nothing.
Well, actually,
Yes, that's right. We're calling it engagement, so it's comms and engagement, engaging with people.
And is that comes at the same level as framework and planning at $220 an hour?
Yes, those are average rates.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I think what we've got here, Councillor Casey, is simply the reality of life, which we kind of rail against, but that's the reality. I do think you pick up a good point, though. Comms is then reported in the news as we're spending 170,000 or whatever it is on spin doctors, and I think we need to make sure that we are very clear that there's community engagement and then there's comms, so you make a good point.
Madam Chair, can I just give one very quick practical example of what that might look like? We had the Onehunga Festival on Saturday, and there was two guys going around with the camera, one interviewing, and they were grabbing people, getting little vox pops, little comments, and it was PDA staff. And they were there as a forerunner to what Panuku will be doing in the community, and it's incredibly important that if it's going to be the lead agency in a transformation area, that people begin to trust that lead agency, see it, hear it, know it. We've got a big role to play. This is not just it's a different space for us in a transformation area, so we are going to need some visibility in a major way to garner those levels of trust. So I thought it was a really good thing to do. Not quite sure where the footage will be used, but it will be used.
Okay, that's a good example. Councillor Wood.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I think it's an excellent start, and congratulations for the work you've done already. I just want to follow up on what Councillor Casey was talking about, is this shareholder or stakeholder engagement and communications plan. I do think that there's kind of the way the culture of that area works now, and Councillor Penrose has dragged me around to some of the bars in the early hours of the morning out there.
Point of order. Poor old Callum has to go along with you, the other way around.
You wouldn't need much encouragement,
well,
would you?
no, I didn't, no. But I do think that, I think that you've got to kind of try and do a bit of a transformation. What's it? Transmogrification, as Mr. Banks used to say. You know what that means.
To a beautiful butterfly.
So I just remember that word, a big word. But no, I do think that is the case, because there's, as Councillor Anai says, it is very spread out, and where the police station and the courthouse is a it's not like out on an island. So those are the areas I think also you're going to have to try and find some way of just joining the place together. So and I think that that town team set up, I think that'd be good to hear back sometime in the future as to how that's all working and what the process in place is.
Yeah, you make a good point, Councillor, because the reality is, even on one site, let alone an area this size, we know people care very deeply about physical changes to what's going on around their business or their home, and that turns a bit sour if people don't feel like they're adequately being consulted and informed. And there are a lot of businesses in this area, as was pointed out earlier. There are a lot of organisations with interests, so we absolutely can't afford to undercook the engagement. I mean, it's not being spent on pamphlets. It's largely high quality interactions that need to take place to make sure we understand people's issues and we talk to them. And you basically can't have inexperienced or unskilled staff or contractors doing this sort of work. Clearly, if we don't need it or we're not going to use it, I mean, this is just trying to get a realistic kind of message around that. Doing something on this scale requires a resource commitment. It's no different from the waterfront or major regeneration efforts elsewhere. We've got to be realistic about the costs, or we will all end up in strife.
Okay, I'd just say keep in touch with the Southern Initiative people as well.
Oh, certainly, I forgot that one, Councillor. So we are working very closely with the Southern Initiative. They're looking at, in fact, co-opting one of their staff to the team. We're not trying to in any way duplicate what they're doing, and some of the thinking for this plan has come from that team. So a number of the initiatives are really the same as theirs. So we've tried to pick out things we think are relevant in this spatial area and work with them to basically help them progress their projects and initiatives as they fit into this. So there's no question that we are doing that or duplicating stuff.
Good. And final word, Councillor Cashwall.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Very brief. Team, the presentation, the workshop last week, was it?
Week before, I think.
Superb. It was really informative and probably well exemplified by the acceptance of the project now. My two very quick questions. Indicative level of private sector buy-in to what you're proposing, have you started that yet? And the second one is, this is a massive project over a number of years involving many millions. What level of risk analysis have you done around timing, sequencing, and the actual project, not even to mention the political risk, just forget that, just the actual project itself?
Yeah. The answer to your question is that over time, because obviously ACPL had exposure in this area with at least some of these sites, and so we know there's a level of commercial interest. We also know that there are barriers to redevelopment, which is what's articulated here. But one of the reasons that we recommended Monaco as a transform location is because we believe basically the market interest is there and needs to be tapped into and leveraged and encouraged, and people need the confidence and certainty that we're investing in the area to encourage private investment to go with it. Obviously, at a sort of intuitive level and at general level, we're aware projects like this have a lot of risk. The piece of work you're looking to is really what's going to unfold as we move through to the right-hand side of that graph I put up at the start, because it's really when we get to that implementation planning and we start to really scope up the cost in detail of these projects, what we expect to get out of these development sites and the level of risk around that. We can start to understand more clearly other risks. We start to look at the timing of things and the risk around that. It's logical to assume that in the life of this project we'll have a turn in the property cycle, so we have to think about all those things as well. But it is later on that happens.
Okay, so the market absorption capacities will
correct.
follow through then.
Yeah, so when we get to that implementation stage on the sort of middle right of that box, that's when we have to start to think, what sites do we put out? I mean, broadly there's a direction here, but in terms of what order they go out and what we cluster together, that's all thinking which goes on then. And as part of what we want the budget for, because there's a reference in the budget, feasibility work, which again is pretty skilled people working out the market realities of these sites and working with the market to figure out how many sites you should release at once and in what order and all that sort of stuff that you're referring to.
Holding costs.